Welcome to Fast Politics, Michael Steele.
Hey, hey, what's up?
Uh, I'm so excited that I get to have you, Alicia, and Simone on my podcast to promote your show. But like, here's the trick. I actually would have had you on anyway to
Yeah.
talk about politics. So it's like there occasionally are times when what I want to talk about and doing something that is sort of what is needed or wanted
Right.
coincide, but almost never. So I'm very excited about this. And I'm extremely happy to have you here. And I think we should start by talking about the 100 days of I Told You So. Do
Right.
you remember what you wrote on a piece of paper on election night at 3 o'clock in the morning to me?
No.
Okay. So
But
3 o'clock in the morning, I am to say that I am like, I'm out of my body. I'm so upset. I am like watching myself. We are on the set, and I look over at you and I'm like, holy, what are we going to do?
Right.
And you write down on a piece of paper, at least we'll be able to say we told them so.
Yeah, and it's true. I was having a conversation. We actually just came up on our show last night, and so when one of the guests had made the comment about, we don't want to necessarily be it saying "I told you so." I'm like, hello. Uh, I forgot that I actually written that down on paper, but it's true. I don't know why we can't say "I told you so." I'm sorry. I give you every warning in the world. If I say to you, "Look, get out of the building, it's on fire.
Yeah.
Get out of the building, it's on fire." And
Yeah.
then you don't get out of the building and bad things happen to you. Yeah, I'm gonna tell you I told you so. I'm sorry, I'm that guy. I'm not just warning you to be a pain in the butt or
Right.
to have Trump derangement syndrome,
Right.
that crazy. I'm warning you because he's warning us.
Right, and I think that's a really good point because we saw so many times on the trail where he would say, people would say, "Well, you don't really mean you're gonna hunt your political enemies," and he'd say, "No, no, I mean that."
Oh,
You know?
yeah, that's
And
exactly what I mean.
right. You were, like, very high up in the Republican Party structure, and
Mhm.
I think you were chair of the RNC?
Yeah, I did that for a little bit, something like that, yeah.
And so, what I think that I mean, there was a moment when all of this stopped making sense, when they
Yeah.
were just like, "We're gonna give up on trying to be, the sort of cut taxes and be, a little less for people, but still, ultimately not so different." I mean, the 2 parties were much more similar than they were different until Trump came along.
I'd agree. There were, but it's interesting. You could see the evolution that was occurring to both, and where that was really sort of one of those moments was when you had the emergence of the Tea Party and Occupy
Right.
Wall Street. They were
Right.
two sides of the same coin,
Interesting.
making the same case against Wall Street, making the same case about government intrusion, et cetera. That then crystallized. Occupy Wall Street sort of went off into crazy land with a whole lot of other stuff. So that collapsed. Tea Party held
Took
on,
over.
but then eventually collapsed and morphed into something else, which then leveled up by the time you get to 2016, Trump. But then when you get into that election, what did you see happening during the course of that primary was the emergence of the Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders voter. That
Right.
sort of progressive, hard right conservative kind of coming together. And I met my first Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump voters at the Democratic convention.
In
Um,
2016?
in 2016 when all the
Yeah.
drama was going on with Hillary and da 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 da, and they didn't, and Bernie made the case. I still contend had he started that race earlier
Yeah.
or he had an extra month, he likely could have been the nominee, would have been the nominee of the Democratic Party because that's where the momentum was going. Very much as we saw with Donald Trump, the same thing was beginning to happen on the left. So you do have the two parties have always kind of been, Molly, in this sort of a race with each other, and along the way they dabble in some policy or you know have an opinion or an ideological spat, but they find a way to get to the point where they can get some things done. That piece is now broken,
What?
and the work that the Congress, for example, used to do has stopped. It has stopped for a while, and so what you now have, interestingly enough, is the two parties shifting and taking on the opposite position, where Democrats today, in many cases, sound like old line Republicans, and Republicans sound like they just bat you know what crazy.
Now I'm gonna ask you a question just for Jesse because he's listening, or maybe he's gone to get a coffee. You think Bernie would have won?
I just look at the trend lines in that election. I mean, the momentum, he had the momentum. That was a big part of how a lot of Democrats felt that the party put their finger on the scales for Hillary.
Yeah.
That the energy on the ground was for Hillary. I mean,
So
for Bernie.
yeah,
And that still is true. I mean,
right.
hell, he just got 30,000 plus people to come out. Who else in politics is talking to 30,000 people in the stadium right now?
I just want to add one thing about Bernie being out there right now, which I think is important, is that, first of all, two things. One is that he's doing it not because he's running for president. He's doing it for the good of American democracy, which is like, this is not the most fun thing. And, I mean, it's good, whatever, but he really is doing it for the greater good, which I think is an important data point. And then also, it is Charles Schumer who is sort of sending these people out there and giving them the blessing to do it, because otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. I mean,
Mhm.
maybe Bernie, I still think Bernie is largely has been pretty much, you know, so I do think when we criticize Schumer, that is an important that he does have senators out there doing the stuff that they're supposed to be doing. Chris Murphy,
Does. I guess, I
Bernie.
mean, I was gonna say if you wanna give it to him, give it to him. My issues with leadership with the leadership of Chuck Schumer is not that he can send a senator out to hold a rally.
Right.
But how do you use the rules of the United States Senate to protect your interests
Right,
and
and the
to advance.
master of the Senate stuff has
Right. I
not
mean,
been.
you've gotten punked at every turn possible,
No, it
especially
hasn't
when it
been good.
comes to judicial appointments. And the fact that Democrats in the Senate capitulated and voted for, in some cases, or allowed the vote to go forward in all cases, with the highly incompetent, not ready for anything close to prime time nominees for various positions in our
Mhm.
government, and there was no fight.
Yeah.
I'm
I
like,
mean,
"Okay, so now you wanna send people out into a rally? Okay, but the rally was should have been before you got
right.
to this point."
No,
And so
that's a good
that's where I
point.
have a problem with the leadership, is that, yes, you have the title, but you don't have the political instincts to know how to use the title.
Right, and there are all sorts of weird Senate things you can do to gum up the works. We've seen Mitch McConnell do
Of
them. We
Yes.
saw Harry Reid do them. That stuff Schumer has not killed it with. Um, I do wanna talk for a minute about the CR,
Mhm.
because in the CR, there was a year prior budget reversal for the District of Columbia. Now they need this money, and poor Mariel Bowser's trying to kind of get it through. And now Republicans, the far right flank, is giving her trouble again, which I think that could have been an easy one that Democrats could have.
It should have been an easy one for the Democrats, in my view. Irrespective of what you think about the District of Columbia, there's 700,000 plus people who live there. I'm a native Washingtonian. My dad still lives in our family home in the city. And the fact that you would have Republicans who fundamentally have a slightly, oh no, just a full-on racist view
Mhm.
of the city. They still think it's Chocolate City, from
Oh,
back in the day of Marion
yeah.
Barry and the street thug life that sort of pervaded in some parts of the city. All of that every urban community went through in the 80s and the 90s and the early
Mhm.
2000s, for example, that, they just have this sort of pejorative view of the city, a city that they barely know because they barely spend any time in it. And it's
Mhm.
just a federal property that they think they can do whatever they want. But they're real people who live there with no vote in the United States Congress that have fought desperately for home rule. I very much remember when home rule was passed.
Yeah.
And I worked on as a young college student on the first amendment to the Constitution to give DC voting rights in 1978. And to hear these people now sort of jerk around with their money, largely these senators and members from Congress, mostly members from Congress from places that are smaller than the District of Columbia,
Right.
is offensive.
Oh.
The racial undertones are well documented, and it's
Oh.
unfortunate. And so you would hope that there would be some friends out there who could fight for this city to strip $1 billion out of the budget. How the hell you think they're going to run their police and fire? How the
Mm.
hell you think they're
No,
going
it's
to
not good.
run the school system and provide the services to the extent that your dumbass still live in the city? And you're going to be calling up the mayor saying, why aren't you picking up the trash? Well, because
Yeah.
you took $1 billion out of the budget.
So
Right? And
bad.
because I'm not the governor of the state of the
Right.
District of Columbia, I'm a mayor, and I gotta
Yeah.
make this stuff work, and when you cut my money, I can't make it work the way you want it to work. So everybody kinda thinks the things you would just cut and everything will continue to run. Not just run, Molly,
Right.
but run better.
Yeah. We're starting to see Republicans are trying to pass the bill. They're now calling it this budget, they're calling it the one big beautiful bill
Well,
because their
that's because
man.
that's what Donald Trump calls it. So,
Right.
when you're yeah.
It's gonna, when you're traveling in the Gulf of America, and in this one big beautiful bill, they need to pay for these tax cuts, right? The whole game here, Doge, everything is to pay for tax cuts. It's to pay for the tax cuts that already happened and the tax cuts that are coming. And the idea here is that these tax cuts, by the way, the new ones, I don't know, the old ones, people are going to be like, where's my tax cut? No, we just extended the other ones, right? I mean, we're not even, but even say the new ones come. Um, the problem is now Elon had all these ideas. He was gonna cut all this stuff. It turns out it's a lot harder than it looks.
It is a lot harder than it looks because when you rob from Peter to pay Paul, you realize, hell, I gotta go and rob Paul to pay Peter. It's all look, it's a finite amount of money.
Right.
Period. It's a but like any budget, is a finite amount. There's only so much that goes in, and there's an amount that goes out. And you're always constantly trying to figure out the balance of those. And so when you say, as the President of the United States, that you want $1 trillion defense budget, okay, where does that come? Okay, Peter.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
Paul wants $1 trillion defense budget. Guess what? I gotta grab a little bit from you to get there.
And
And that's the way this works. So, if you stop and think about it, the only time in our modern lifetime that we've seen the balancing the budget was during Clinton's
mhm.
period, and Newt Gingrich in the House, and there was this sense of trying to work towards some level of common goals. And they decided what those goals were, and they put in
Mhm.
motion the steps necessary to do that. And voila, they balanced the budget. There were compromises. There were things that Democrats weren't happy about, Republicans weren't happy about, but they ultimately resulted in a number of years of not just balanced budgets, but surpluses, money that was then subsequently returned to the public in some form. And so that's governing. That's not what we're doing now. We're
No.
trying to placate a particular class of people by giving them unfettered access to cash and wealth. And for a lot of people, that is like you just said, they're sitting here thinking that they're going to get a tax cut. Well, you didn't get a tax cut the last time, and the
Yeah.
only thing they want to do is extend those tax cuts now,
Yeah.
which means you still don't get a tax cut.
Yeah.
And so that's the hard, cruel reality. And it's $880 billion that's got to be made up somewhere. And where do you think that's going to come from? It's coming from that school lunch program
Yeah.
that you need in your little Mississippi district.
Or
It
Head
comes from
Start.
that after school program that you need in your Alabama district.
Yeah.
And the communities that are often hurt the most are the ones clamoring the loudest for the thing that will hurt them the most. And that's fundamentally because I don't think they appreciate or understand just how they're impacted. I talked to one guy who got excited by the fact that he saw $50 more in his paycheck every 2 weeks from the last tax cut. And I said, well, that's nice because you know that guy over there? He got 1,000. So there you are.
Why are people having such a hard time standing up to Trump?
Mm.
Why is everyone so scared of him? And I'm going to give you one example. Janet Mills, governor of Maine, says, I'll see you in court on, the 5 trans kid athletes in Maine. Maybe there are
Right,
10.
right,
Probably there are 2 or 1.
right.
She goes to court, she wins. So why is everyone so scared of Trump?
Because they're punks. They're punks. Bullies pick them out. At the beginning of the school year, the bully often walks the playground the first day or 2 of school to size up what's in the yard.
Right.
And Donald Trump has, over the 4 years that he was waiting in the wings, sized up the yard and has made promises to a number of these folks who think they're actually going to get something.
Right.
Right? Others, he wants to make an example of, and he knows who he can make an example of. And the rest just look there and tremble and say, "There, but for the grace of God goes I."
Right.
I don't want that to happen to me. And my question is, why not? What do you think's going to happen to you? Do you think that if you give Donald Trump $1 billion worth of pro bono work, that he's not going to ask you to represent some very unsavory characters that got in trouble because of him? That's the pro bono work. It ain't doing what you did with the Legal Aid Society, dumbass. It is exactly what Donald Trump wants you to do. And now they're coming to realize that, Molly. They're like, oh, suddenly now, oh, so you mean we got to represent who? Yes, Donald Trump has a list of people that you need to take care of. Some of them may be January 6ers, some of them may be former officials from his last administration, whatever. So
Roger
when you make
Stone.
yourself beholden to the thug, you're going to get caught up in thug things. And so I don't understand the fear because there are more examples of people standing up and winning, to your very point, than there are people kowtowing and capitulating and winning.
True. Michael Steele. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.